Double Cross, and Other Skills I Learned as a Super Spy by Jackson Pierce. Chapter 14. While most everyone at SRS ate dinner in their apartments, lunch was pretty much always eaten in the cafeteria. No one wanted to run back to their apartments, eat, and then rush back to class or work or Central Asia, so everyone was willing to muddle through whatever super healthy and super tasteless combination of food the nutritionists had drummed up. After Thursday's morning classes, during which Walter managed to take his shirt off not once, but twice, we all walked to the lunchroom in a pack, Otter trailing along behind us. I kept pace with the others. Then, when we cleared the cafeteria doors, I hurried ahead of the line. Mission. Get sent on Friday's mission. Step 1. Wait for Chili Day. 4-bean chili was famous at SRS because it was the closest thing the nutritionist could make to junk food. Sure, it was meatless and cheeseless, and the nutritionist was always trying to convince us that soft tofu was a perfect topping, but still. In a sea of salads and fish cakes, chili was precious. No one missed getting at least one bowlful. Today was Chili Day. A few ladies from enemy surveillance were already eating, but rose when we jostled our way towards the soup station. They looked annoyed that a bunch of kids were interrupting their lunch break. I got to the serving counter first, grabbed a bowl, and reached for the ladle. Cameron pressed in close behind me, like if he didn't practically stand on my shoulder bones, he might miss out. Step 2. Force proximity. Proximity was key for this sort of trick. The closer you were to someone, the less they could see. Everyone knew that, in fact. Everyone at SRS knew this entire trick since we learned it in year 3. But since it didn't involve explosions, daring escapes, or fancy codes, I suspected my classmates wouldn't even realize I was pulling one over on them. Back off, I huffed at him, taking my time lifting the lid from the pot of chili. Come on, Hale, Cameron said, rolling his eyes at me. You're holding everyone up. Step 3. Create a diversion. I lowered the ladle into the chili, scooped up a serving, and brought it towards my bowl. I let the ladle strike the side of the pot, spilling about half of its contents over the edge and onto the floor. Cameron behind me jerked backwards so the splatter didn't get him, forcing those behind him to do the same. Careful, man, he shouted, and a few of the people in the back of the line craned their necks to see what the holdup was all about. It's your fault. You're right on top of me. What's your problem? I said, trying to puff myself up the way Otter did when he was angry. Take a moment to be as freaked out as I was to be acting like Otter on purpose. Cameron's eyes jolted from the ground to mine, challenging me, which meant I had the last thing I needed to pull this off. Step 4. Get their attention. You couldn't keep your eyes on someone and on the giant vat of chili. That was rude. You should apologize, Cameron said threateningly. At this, the line behind him went silent. I hesitated. Whatever, fine, I'm sorry, I said swiftly. Then I broke our eye contact and returned the ladle to the chili, scooping up a small bowlful. I hurried to grab a seat while the rest of the class filed through the line. Otter finished flirting with the nutritionist and followed behind them. Soon the other classes started filing in. The 11-year-olds, then the 10-year-olds, then Kennedy's class of 9-year-olds. They all took big bowlfuls of chili. Step 5. Everyone enjoys 4-bean chili. Well, technically it was now 5-bean chili, since I'd managed to dump nearly the entire bag of jelly beans into the vat during the diversion. They sank down into the chili while I held eye contact with Cameron. And now they were being eaten by every single person at SRS, including me. I dug my spoon in and took a few bites. I could taste the bright flavor of the jelly beans, but only because I was looking for it. I lifted my eyes to make sure the rest of my classmates were eating as enthusiastically as expected on Chili Day. They were. In fact, Some were nearly finished with their first serving. So far, it was going perfectly. I hoped there were enough that everyone got at least one. Someone screamed. It was a junior agent, a girl from my class with pretty hair. Personally, I thought her hair looked even prettier, complemented by the lavender shade her skin was turning, but based on the horrified look she was giving her ever-purpling palms, she disagreed. "Is she choking?" someone shouted. "Does she need mouth-to-mouth?" Michael shouted louder. "Don't you dare," the girl shrieked back. "What's happening? What?" Another shriek, this time from a boy a year younger than I was, who was now the sort of flat color of squashed plums. Then Michael himself turned, then Otter, then... I looked down and suppressed a grin. My hands were turning a now familiar shade of violet. Step 6. Everyone turns purple. Someone went running to get the on-call nurses, who then ran in with bags full of shots and wraps and pills, none of which were especially useful against the plague of purple. They sealed the doors just in case whatever we had was contagious, but it didn't take long for everyone to figure out that whatever it was, it had to do with the food. The nurses picked through the remains of the chili vat, but it was mostly empty. When they looked at the pot the nutritionist had been moments from bringing out, they found nothing but 4 kinds of regular old beans swimming in a thick broth. Still, they took samples, which they passed off to a few agents from them for lab chem testing. I told Dr. Fishburn. I told him to stop getting chemical shipments through the kitchen door. This was bound to happen, the nutritionist cried as she flipped through her recipe book frantically, like she'd somehow missed a note that warned may cause purple. I felt a little bad about how upset she was, but given how often she tried to pass off cucumbers as a dessert item, my guilt didn't last long. I sat back. A few people had apparently missed out on getting a jelly bin in their chili, but luckily for me, they were mostly the 9-year-olds. Otter was a particularly rotten-looking color, but oddly it suited him, though he looked a little bit like a walking tomato as he frantically talked to Fishburne over a comm unit. "Hail!" someone shouted beside me. I spun around. It was Kennedy, who was almost neon purple. Added to her bright red hair, she looked like some kind of exotic flower. "Don't worry, Kennedy," I began, but Kennedy cut me off with a big grin. "I'm not worried. This is awesome. Hey, wait, yours is fading." "Huh?" Kennedy motioned at me. I looked down. Sure enough, the purple was fading slowly, just like it had back at the League. First my nose, then my cheeks and ears. It was another 2 hours before the color was gone entirely, but the time they let us leave the cafeteria, I was completely normal colored. The nurses swarmed me. "Huh?" said the oldest nurse, a woman with wispy gray hair and big glasses. "I guess he metabolized it quicker. Makes sense, he's a bigger guy than the rest of them." "You're saying Hale isn't purple anymore because he's Hale the whale?" Walter asked, laughing. I lifted an eyebrow at him. "You look like an Easter egg, and you're making fun of me?" Walter sniggled to a stop and rolled his eyes, but I saw his ego deflate a little. It was very satisfying. Walter and the other purple people walked out of the cafeteria. Otter stepped through the crowd. I hadn't even realized he was still there. "Hale, Dr. Fishburn, and I will need to talk with you. His office, 30 minutes. "Yes, sir," I said, nodding. It was hard not to grin. My plan was working. I walked Kennedy back to our apartment, where Ms. Alma was waiting for us. She didn't believe in taking lunch breaks, so she'd been spared the whole incident. She acted like Kennedy hadn't tried hard enough not to turn purple. I made it back to Fishburne's office just a few moments early and sat down by the door, leaning my back against the sleek frosted glass that made up the administrative sector. I could hear Fishburne talking with someone, I think the nutritionist, on the other side. Down the hall, another door opened. I leaned forward to see who it was, then tightened my chest to hold in a groan. Mrs. Quattlebaum, wearing a suit so stiff that it looked like a little like a beetle's shell. She gave me a firm stare as she passed, clutching several folders to her chest. She was the assistant director. Did she know about my parents being in the weeds? Did she know that SRS was really the criminal organization? It was impossible to tell. Walter was just behind his mom. His skin was a particularly feminine shade of purple, like the color of fancy eye makeup or expensive flowers. Walter scowled at me and continued on after his mother. Just as he reached the door that led out of the administrative sector, he stopped. I saw him argue with himself for a moment, looking at the ceiling and tapping his toes. Eventually, he glanced over his shoulder at me. I'm real sorry to hear about your parents, Hale, he said swiftly. Thanks. It wasn't until the word left my mouth that I realized I was saying it, and it hung in the air between us, inflated by 10 years of being friends and 1 of being mortal enemies. It felt like one of us should say something else, but what? We'd already fought about Walter ditching me. We'd had shouting match after shouting match about how people change, and it's not like we wanted to be best friends. We just ended up that way. So there was nothing left, really. Walter pulled open the door and shut it behind him. I puzzled in the quiet for a second, but then the door to Fishburne's office swung open. The nutritionist stepped out, cradling her cookbooks and sniffling to herself. I rose and walked in. Otter was sitting in a chair by Fishburne's desk. Sit down, Otter said, rubbing his temples like he couldn't bear to look at me. I lowered myself into one of the metal chairs across from Fishburne's desk. It wasn't until I was sitting down that I felt my stomach drop a little. They weren't just Otter and Fishburne, my teacher and director, anymore. Now they were Otter and Fishburne, my enemies? That word seemed too strong, but it was true. Otter might have been too low-ranking to know my parents were in the weeds, but Fishburne definitely knew. Fishburne was the one who'd called for it. In fact, he was the director, after all. How could he? This was his fault. Everything was his fault. I took a sharp breath and forced my thoughts to a halt. If I let my emotions get the best of me, Otter and Fishburne would see it in my face, and my whole plan would be ruined. Hale, Fishburne said, carefully, as he rolled his fingers across a pencil. As you know, today we had a little bit of, what would you call it, Agent Otter? Pandemonium? A total breakdown of basic ordering and delivery system? A potential poisoning? Drama, Fishburne said tartly. Let's say we had a little bit of drama today in the cafeteria. Fishburne paused to double-check that the pencils on his desk were all lined up correctly. We had a mission scheduled for tomorrow morning, an important one that only a junior agent can help with. But from the looks of things, whatever drama happened in the cafeteria today has turned all of our junior agents purple. We can't exactly send purple people out on a mission. They'd attract all sorts of attention. Right. So we've changed a few of the parameters and streamlined things, and we would like you to go instead. Step 7, become the last resort. I blinked. I mean, this was what I wanted. This was what I'd planned for, yet actually hearing Fishburne say it, my mind felt all blank and soggy. I stared. I knew my mouth was hanging open, but I couldn't remember how to shut it. To be clear, you're not a junior agent. We just don't want to scrap the mission. It's really very simple anyway. Planting a small bit of software onto the computers at a children's hospital. We've got a folder for you here. He paused to lift a blue folder from his desk and hand it to me. Tomorrow, 0800, you'll meet Agent Otter by the elevators, okay? Got it, I said. Fishburne gave me a kind of smile, but it was a little forced. Otter didn't bother trying. Instead, he sucked at his teeth and shook his head. I thanked them both a few times, then left. Once I was alone in the hallway, I took a big breath and closed my eyes. A balloon had been inflating in my stomach, and now it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. Finally, I was being sent on a mission. A real mission, not some stupid errand. I was being trusted. I was a spy, a real spy, and now everyone would know it. I thought about how Kennedy would react, how Mom and Dad would react. The balloon in my stomach deflated. I'd imagined this day hundreds and hundreds of times before, literally dreamed about it even. And in every single version, I ran home to tell my parents. They celebrated and cheered and beamed like the sun and brought out ice cream and told me, "We always knew you could do it, Hale." In every single version, I was working for the good guys, not the criminals. This wasn't the way I'd planned on it happening, but real spies can deal with a change of plans. As expected, Kennedy lost her mind when she heard the news of the mission. She bounded and rebounded off all the furniture, talking quickly about how excited she was, how excited I should be, had I thought about what form of martial arts I would use, had SRS provided me with a cover character, because if not, she could help me think of one. Ms. Elma regarded Kennedy's enthusiasm with a horrified look, like my sister was some sort of lab experiment gone wrong, though that might have been just because she was still a little lavender around the ears. Eventually, Kennedy's boiling glee reduced to a simmer. I said I was going to study the folder of mission details, then go to sleep early. I had to be up at 0800 after all. That was partially true. I did study the mission details, going over them again and again. I didn't, however, go to sleep early. I listened to Kennedy go to bed, then Ms. Elma creaked down the hall to my parents' bedroom, where I didn't like to think about her sleeping. It was only then that I opened my bedroom door to retrieve the League comm unit. It's hard to hide things in a building full of spies, especially when one such spy is your kid sister, who isn't afraid to mess with your stuff. Plus, I didn't trust Ms. Elma not to snoop around in my room while I was away in class. But there was a linen closet directly opposite to my bedroom, full of towels and sheets, but also full of winter blankets that we wouldn't need anytime soon. I'd carefully tucked the jewelry away in the folds of the largest one. I darted my hand in between the folds, retrieved the comm, and, feeling somewhat smug about my hiding spot, went back to my bedroom. I holed myself up in my closet with the comm and the mission folder. Fishburne had given me the mission folder, and then I lifted the earring to my ear. I could hear the faint static through it. "Clatterbook?" I whispered into the bracelet's enormous ruby earpiece. "It's me." I began to wish we'd come up with call names on the odd chance that someone at SRS was hacking the comm. "Hale? Hale?" Clatterbook said on the other end almost immediately. "Hold on, my earring isn't on right." There was a rustling sound, then it stopped. I continued. "I'm going on a mission tomorrow," I said. Clatterbook's voice was loud now, so loud that I worried the ancient comm unit had some sort of speakerphone setting. "Really? What kind of mission?" "It's not for ground cover," I said with a sigh. That had been the first thing I'd checked for in the folder. "It's part of something called Operation Evergreen. Another agent and I are going to a children's hospital in Fairview. I'll be undercover as a sick kid named Clifton Harris, and another agent will be playing my father. The objective is for us to install a program on the hospital servers." Like a computer program?" Clatterbook said. He sounded like he was trying to speak a foreign language. "Yes, of course. I don't know what it does, though. I mean, I can't see them intentionally crashing the server in a children's hospital, but—" "Hale?" a new voice said. I frowned, confused for a moment. "Beatrix?" I asked. "Hey, my uncle isn't really a computer person. He was an agent back when computers were the size of a suitcase, but I can help you." "How?" "I can write a program to go on top of whatever they've created. I'm guessing they'll have it on a flash drive, right?" Beatrix's voice was bright and cheery, like we were talking about sharing a photo collection. "I'm leaving at 0800. There's no time to write a program." Beatrix made a little noise of indignation, and I heard her lean away from the receiver. From the bracelet, I guess. He thinks I can't write one before 8 in the morning. I know. She was back and loud in my ear. I can write the program. I just need to figure out how the Children's Hospital wrote their program and then figure out what the most obvious way would be for SRS to write their program and then reverse. You know what? I can do it. It'll be ready by 8. I wasn't totally convinced, but seeing how her brother had already proven himself a pretty excellent inventor, I had no reason to think Beatrix wasn't equally talented. Great, I said. SRS's program has to work. If they don't get whatever information they need, I'm sure they'll find a way to blame me, and that'll be the end of me going on missions. Got it, Beatrix said excitedly. I'll work on it tonight, and then tomorrow I'll get it. We both stopped. How could Beatrix get me the program before tomorrow morning? It wasn't like she could just send it to me in an envelope, and the hits guys would definitely catch a rogue program if she tried to email it. I'd have to get a hard copy from her tomorrow at the hospital. Otter would be able to spot a brush pass a mile away, so she'd have to drop it somewhere only I would be able to pick it up. But I couldn't just root through a potted plant or a light fixture with Otter standing right there. Are Ben and your uncle nearby? I asked. Yep. Great. I'm going to need everyone's help with this.